Class 105, thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon, guests, colleagues, and potential applicants. I hope you find yourself well in this first part of February. We want to welcome you to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Round 8 Notice of Funding Availability Workshop presentation. We are joined by our partners at the Strategic Growth Council, who will be presenting alongside of us today. For those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting either at a groundbreaking or a grand opening over the most recent past, my name is Lynn Jones, and I'm one of two section chiefs here at HCD within the Climate Investments branch. Next slide. So let's start with some general housekeeping information. Obviously, virtual formats are much easier to manage, but we still want to make the most of our time together and make this the most efficient experience for all of you. So all of your mics have been muted, and that is to protect the integrity of this presentation. And we are asking that all cameras be turned off as to prevent any unintended interruptions. Today's presentation should take about an hour and a half to complete, and about halfway through the presentation, we will go into a short 10-minute break. We will not be answering project-specific questions, unfortunately. In order to do that effectively, we would just need more information on the full project scope, and more time is needed to dive into those project specifics than we have here today. However, we do have a formal question and answers process through our Strategic Growth Partners website, where you can submit project-specific details and the question that you are inquiring about on the form, where we will have staff to address those questions and formally send out a response. And lastly, we will be holding all questions until the end of the presentation. But in the meantime, if a question arises, please feel free to use the question and answers feature here in Zoom. And we have a team of staff here that are taking those questions down and compiling answers, and we'll go ahead and address those at the end. But also keep in mind that if there are any questions that need a little bit more research, we'll reserve the right to withhold an answer for that so that we can get you the most accurate response. Next slide. So here we have the the AHSC program team is split between both partners, SGC as well as HCD. And while everyone here is not present from SGC, we are joined by Brianne and Mark, who will be presenting today. And our entire HCD staff will be covering information on today's presentation. So let's get started on what we're going to look at today. We have a pretty robust agenda, as you can tell, and the layout of our presentation resembles many workshops we have done in the past. However, we have included elements which may have been updated since the last round of funding was released. Our team will cover the following topics, starting with our SGC partners, who will present the AHSC program overview and also key changes for round 8. And then staff will cover the 3 phases of the review process, which is threshold, scoring, and also feasibility. And then we'll briefly discuss the Round 8 application workbook overview and the submittal process. And Alicia will then close us out with HCD policies, quantitative methodology updates, and applicant resources. And obviously, we'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. All right, so let's talk about the timeline really quick for AHSC Round 8. If you recall, we wrapped Round 7 AHSC awards in late August of 2023, and our partners at the Strategic Growth Council went to work very quickly to update the guidelines for Round 8. As you can see, draft guidelines were released less than a month after awards in September of 23, and SGC adopted the Round 8 guidelines by December. HCD released the NOFA and the application workbook about mid-January, and applications for this round are due March 19th of 2024. Similar to last year, we expect to go to ILC in the month of August, and we hope to have those done prior to the TCAC submittal deadline. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mark, who will be presenting an overview of the AHSC program and key changes introduced for Round 8. Thank you.
All right, hi everyone. I'm actually going to be presenting this part. My name is Brianne Logasa. I am a program associate on the AHSC team for SGC. So if we could go to the next slide. In these next few slides, I'm going to go into a higher level overview of AHSC and sort of how it works. And then as Lynn shared, they're going to get into the nitty gritty of everything else later on in the webinar. So just first for our vision, the overarching goal of AHSC is to fund infill housing and transportation projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. So put in simple terms, our aim is to build affordable housing near efficient transit and encourage less driving. In order to be eligible for funding for AHSC, your application must contain an affordable housing component. This can come in the form of an affordable housing development, loan or grant, or housing-related infrastructure. Housing-related infrastructure includes elements you need for housing, but are not necessarily the housing development itself, such as like water, sewage, and other things of that nature. With the housing component, we also fund sustainable transportation infrastructure, transportation-related amenities and programs, and I'll go into more details about those, what those are made up of on the next slide. We could go jump over there, please. Oh, I think we want to go back one more. Perfect, thank you. So for more details on what we actually fund in the affordable housing developments, we fund both rental projects and home ownership projects. And as I mentioned on the last slide, the housing-related infrastructure includes any infrastructure improvements as required as a condition of approval. So again, like water, sewage, trash. And new to round 8, housing-related infrastructure also includes factory-built housing components. For sustainable transportation infrastructure, or STI, those include transportation improvements that sort of enable movement. So buses, bikeways, sidewalks, crosswalks, ramps, etc. So I always put these in terms as like, these are the items that help people get from point A to point B, whereas the second category below that, transit-related amenities, or TRA, are more about enhancing the experience of someone waiting for transit. So this includes bus shelters, bike parking, street lighting, urban greening. So they can kind of see the difference of STI gets you moving and TRA makes that experience more enjoyable while you're waiting. All right, so after that we have programs, and those are community programs for residents of the affordable housing development and their neighbors, with a specific health, safety, social and emotional well-being, or economic development goal. The programs listed here are some examples. So active transportation programs, transit ridership programs, air pollution reduction programs, low-income car share programs, tenant legal counseling. As you can see, it kind of runs the gambit, and there are a lot of options when it comes to programs. And next slide, please. Goodness, thank you. All right, so for all the housing, transportation, and programs dollars that make up AHSC, they come from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or cap and trade. So AHSC receives 20% of auction proceeds. So funding availability varies round to round depending on the total auction proceeds gathered from year to year. In addition to that, for round 8, that means that we have $675 million to use, just based again on those auction proceeds. Now, the maximum award per project is $50 million. Up to $35 million can be used for the affordable housing development and housing-related infrastructure, while up to $15 million can be used for sustainable transportation infrastructure and transit-related amenities. Because of the scale and complexity of this program, the minimum award amount for this program is, or just per project for this program, is $10 million. All right, next slide. Now, this funding program is competitive, with projects being awarded based on the highest score. However, score is considered as part of one's project area type and considered among all of these other requirements that I'll lay out here. So we aim to fund 35% of the total funding availability to transit-oriented development and integrated connectivity projects each. And then 10% to rural innovation project areas. If you add up those percentages, you may have noticed that it leaves us about 20% short of 100. And that extra 20% is used as leeway for us to ensure that we meet our statutory and council targets, which are to award at least 50% to disadvantaged communities. And we want to make sure 50% of the total funding will also go to housing. So for example, if you apply for $10 million in housing, $10 million in housing dollars, you can only ask for 10 million in transportation dollars, despite the fact that transit cap can be up to 15 million. And that's because we want to make sure 50% of your application is housing. We also aim to award at least one tribal project each round, as well as award at least one project per geographic area. Our council has designated 8 geographic areas, which if we go to the next slide, I can show you in more detail. Perfect, thank you. So I'll take a moment to pause here on this slide so you can identify which region your project may be in. One caveat or just something to note is that the North State and Sierras region is the only non-contiguous region. So those bright red squares over the counties, those are one region just broken up. All right, with that, I hope you all had a second to look at that. We can move on to the next slide. So jumping into the awards process, not a ton has changed since round 7, now being in round 8. So the threshold and initial score letters will be combined into one letter. As a reminder, the initial score letter will only provide the metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent measurement, whereas the full GHG score will not be calculated until after all the appeals are complete. And like last round, negative points may be assessed to entities that may not have met major project milestones for past AHSC projects or other HCD funded projects. And just note these negative points are appealable. Our aim is to award projects with a minimum of 70 points. However, as discussed in the last slide, in order to meet our statutory and council goals, the minimum score amount is flexible. Bear in mind, though, that even if you are the only project applying, for example, in one of the 8 geographic regions, that doesn't mean that you're going to be automatically awarded. You will still need to meet all eligibility requirements and have a decent competitive score. Additionally, we do not provide any partial funding. So your project will be either awarded 100% or it won't be awarded at all. And I think that closes out everything. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague, Mark Caswell, to discuss with y'all some of the guideline changes from round 7 to round 8.
Thank you so much, Brianne. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Caswell. I'm the program manager for the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program at the Strategic Growth Council. And I work closely with Brianne and the rest of the HCD team, who you'll meet shortly after this, after I present. Next slide. So I'm going to go over some of the changes between round 7 and round 8. At the high level, we worked really hard after significant updates between round 6 and round 7. We worked really hard to stabilize the program. We know what's working and really identify those programs that are working and make relatively minor changes to this round. There are a couple slides, but compared to previous changes, I think it's pretty straightforward. A lot of the changes were designed to really increase access for different projects, especially in disadvantaged communities, and then also really to streamline both the application process and the review process simultaneously. We looked at ways to really identify those opportunities and make those changes rather than simply changes for change's sake. We wanted to make sure that we know that it's easier and more equitable if we can maintain a program's stability in order to allow people to reapply more quickly and allow lower resource communities to be able to track and identify these changes while they're moving forward. So first and one of the biggest changes is that we redefined the rural project. We're saying rural means rural. What that means is regardless of your transit type, you are rural. Sometimes there were projects that had trains in rural areas that may have caused some confusion there. And so if you are in a rural area, you are a RIPA project, as you learned about in the TOD, ICP, and RIPA category. Similarly, a lot of comment letters requested that we increase the radius of the project area for rural projects to 2 miles in order to recognize the difference in land use between rural areas and suburban and urban areas. I am skeptical that this will have a significant change on projects, but we heard it so loud and clear from so many stakeholders, we wanted to give it a chance to happen. So we're calling this a test and we're going to see how it goes and maybe restore back to the 1.0. But for this round, it'll be a 2-mile radius for rural projects and rural projects only. For TOD and ICP, it remains at a 1-mile radius. We also included factory-built housing deposits. A lot of times these are something that need to happen earlier than construction. We've added those in as a HRI cost, which is a grant, which will allow it to be able to be achieved sooner than it would be if it was an AHD loan. Next slide. We also worked to really align with the super NOFA. That way we were cleaning up terms of home ownership grants, award limits, and minimums for projects. We wanted to make sure that that was all aligned with other programs by HCD. So that's all listed in the NOFA. When you're looking, there is the guidelines and then there is the NOFA. There's important material in both. Make sure you're reading both of those and familiar with the two aspects there. But our goal is to really align with the super NOFA as much as possible. For CEQA and NEPA, we had heard loud and clear from folks that the NEPA requirements would only happen at loan closing and not earlier. So CEQA is required at time of application for housing. NEPA will be required at the time of construction loan closing. And STI and TRA components will only be required to submit it for initial disbursement of grant funds. So essentially as you're starting construction. Sustainable community strategies. Those are something that apply to a lot of projects that are in MPO areas, but some projects that are in non-MPO areas, metropolitan planning organization areas, so rural areas, have a alternative planning strategy, APS, which serves a similar purpose to an SCS, but we heard from stakeholders that they wanted to include APSs and the same level of SCSs, and we thought that made sense. We also updated references to the multifamily housing program, CalHome, and negative points throughout the document to make sure we're referencing the most recent guidelines and most recent memos. We also separated out the concept of internet service requirement versus connectivity. You are required to do both of those, but we want to make sure it was clear on how they were both required. And then we dropped the internet service requirement from 5 years to 3 years. A lot of folks really wanted to hear it stay at 3 years to match the grant requirements and grant limits. And so we agreed with that and said it's 3 years instead of 5 years. And they are still an eligible cost to provide internet service, at no cost to the residents of the housing site for 3 years using AHSC funds. So that is still there at 3 years. Next slide. Scoring criteria. We increased the bikeway miles for context-sensitive bikeway points. We kept the low-level number the same, but we increased the high number to really see some projects that might be stretching a bit further. We really created a system where we know that the first bits are easy. It gets harder as you increase. And so we created a scoring system that is commensurate with that. So do make sure you're looking at the new amount of miles for bikeways. The bikeway concept of context-sensitive bikeways and network connectivity remain the same. We also clarified what a continuous improvement means when we talk about that from a sidewalk component and walkway component. That was something that caused some confusion in our review process, and we wanted to make sure that we were finding ways to benefit that. And we also created a tiered structure for the project for the gap of sidewalks. We created a tiered structure for that because we know a lot of folks aren't able to necessarily meet the full number, so we created a halfway point there as well. Pro housing. Based on feedback from our partners at the policy department at HCD, we reduced that number from 3 points for projects in localities that are designated as pro housing from 3 points down to 2 points. And we removed the options for simply applying for pro housing, but instead we said that the pro housing can be certified after application due date, which will allow projects to have the opportunity to get their application in the door. And so long as you are officially designated, in that time, you will get the points. That was something that last year we weren't quite sure if we could make it where we'd say you'll get the points if you're designated after award. We were able to work out a timeline that works with the program. And projects that do apply will make sure that they are getting reviewed in sufficient time to get their scores for pro housing should they be designated as such. Next slide. Bus rapid transit. We've created a definition for bus rapid transit that matches the state's definition in the Public Resource Code, and we reference a Caltrans high-quality transit map to identify if a project is near a bus rapid transit stop or a rail stop. Those of you that closely read the draft guidelines may have seen a much broader definition of high-quality transit that would have included much of the state, and we rolled that back based on a lot of feedback and rolled that back to say bus rapid transit or rail means you're a high quality transit, which means you are a TOD. Now we have a map where we can all look at together. We can all see these projects that are at a bus rapid transit or rail stop that meets the timing criteria to determine if you are a TOD or ICP. This was what we used to verify on the back end, but we never actually directly told folks this is what we're using. So this creates a clarity and visibility for applicants to understand how we are doing our review process, to make sure that you're able to not just guess how we're doing it, but instead to really have a proper definition, define things, and have us singing off of the same book. Factory built, as I mentioned, we added that to round 8. We are encouraging folks for factory built projects. That is something that is a priority coming out of the governor's office. So, projects that are using factory built housing, we are looking favorably towards them. And if there's a challenge in the guidelines related to factory built that maybe we haven't considered, please do let us know using the question and answer document, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second. Pedestrian access routes, we added a formal definition of that based on stakeholder request. Exactly what we mean when we say pedestrian access routes. It's using the Caltrans definition from their design bulletin related to accessibility. Transit, station, and stop. We also clarified how we measure the distance from the housing site to the transit stop and what we consider an entrance. Some of the projects with the larger rail stations, like a BART station especially, has the edge of the parking lot versus the edge of the walkway versus the actual place where you get on the train, and where we define that and really clarify that for folks. So that should be much more clear now. And again, questions, you can use the Q&A form on that. Next slide. So before we jump into threshold and I introduce Donna, just a reminder that we have a question and answer live form. We're gonna share the link in the chat and the Q&A here, and we'll make sure that we get that out to folks. If you do have questions, whether we're not gonna answer project specific questions, but if you have a question about interpretation of the guidelines, you can always use the Q&A form, which we will respond to within 4 business days, and give an answer in a public forum. So that way everybody has access to the same information. If you send an email, we're not going to answer the question via email. We're going to encourage you to use the Q&A form. And we'll make sure we get that link out to everybody so they can make sure that they're sharing there, and we can all share our information to make sure we're all operating on the same information base. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our partner at HCD, Donna Walker.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. My name is Donna Walker, and I will be going over threshold requirements with you. There's an extensive list of items that each must be met in order for the application to move on to the scoring phase. This will be a high-level overview of our threshold requirements. Then I will highlight a few specifically. You can always refer to our Round 8 guidelines, section 106 for the complete details. In addition, threshold items can also be found in sections 102 through 105. Next slide, please. For our program requirements, applicants must quantify that the project will achieve GHG emissions reductions, provide transit passes for residents of the affordable housing development, support sustainable community strategy, certify that the housing will be smoke-free, incorporate urban greening features, obtain all necessary environmental clearances and land use approvals. The project must meet feasibility requirements, including the underwriting standards in our UMRs. The application must be sufficiently complete for us to adequately assess project eligibility, including documentation for all other committed funding sources. Next slide, please. Additional program requirements include site control. The primary applicant must maintain ultimate control of the project through the award date. Developer experience. The developer of the project must demonstrate their experience by providing evidence of 2 previously built affordable housing projects. Applicants will also need to certify that construction has not started prior to the application deadline. The project will not convert agricultural or other working lands, that there is no active or pending litigation at the time of application, that the project is in compliance with the local housing element, and it must meet our program's affordability criteria. Next slide, please. Emission reductions are a key requirement of our program and are reviewed for both a minimum threshold as well as for points during scoring. This is measured in terms of reduced BMT and is calculated using CARB's GHG benefits calculator tool, which is linked to the application or can be located at SGC and CARB's websites. All proposed affordable housing developments that are located in a jurisdiction that has fare-based transit will have to provide at least one transit pass to each restricted unit for a minimum of 3 years. Next slide, please. There is requirement for the development to be an all-electric design with no connections to natural gas infrastructure. Zero-emission generators, battery arrays, and microgrids are an eligible cost. Secondly, each restricted unit must be provided with high-speed internet for at least 3 years. You may use program funds from the AHSC grant. Next slide, please. Next, let's look at which entities are eligible to apply for AHSC. Each project may have either one applicant or multiple applicants applying jointly. We often see a developer apply jointly with a city or county, but here is the complete list of all eligible entities. The bolded ones are the most common, which are developer, public, private, or nonprofit, local transportation, Department of Public Works Department, city or county, and transit agency or operator. Next slide, please. A few additional notes on eligible applicants. Often a developer will form a special purpose entity that they control, and that will be the ultimate borrower of the loan funds. But that entity would not be your applicant. For more information on special purpose entities, please reference UMR section 8313.2. If a public agency has a real property interest in the proposed project, then the agency must be included as one of the applicants or include a commitment to enter into an agreement to develop the project. Eligible tribes would include a tribally designated housing entity or listed in the Bureau of Indian Affairs Offices of Federal Acknowledgement Petitioner list, or tribes that are on the contact list maintained by Native American Heritage Commission. Lastly, it is important to understand that if there are multiple applicants, they are jointly and severally liable, meaning if any of the applicant entities fail to complete the awarded capital projects, then the entire project could be considered in default. Next slide, please. Little more on site control. At the time of application, a sponsor applicant must have site control of the proposed project property in the name of the sponsor or an entity controlled by the sponsor through the award date. Documentation must be in the name of the sponsor or an entity controlled by the sponsor. The organizational documents submitted with the application must clearly demonstrate sponsor control. For projects developed in Indian country, where site control is a ground lease, the lease agreement should last for no less than 50 years. An attorney's opinion regarding chain of title and current title status is acceptable in lieu of a title report. Next slide, please. For developer experience, the developer of the project must demonstrate their ability to successfully complete the project by providing 2 previously built affordable housing projects, the similar scope and size that was completed by the applicant during the 10 years preceding the application due date. The key changes to experience requirement this round is experience is only attributable to an entity, not an individual or principal. To expand on this further, a single person cannot provide what is necessary to make these projects happen without a team of numerous, likewise experienced individuals supporting them. This is why experience has historically been tied to entities, not individuals. And for the AHD component, Completed projects submitted must include a functionally equivalent number of units, type of construction, number of stories and amenities, and demonstration of experience must not be cumulative across multiple projects. Next slide, please. Now let's look at the project area. Each project area must be a contiguous area with no greater than a 1 mile radius from a single point inside the parcel. For scattered sites, applicants must choose one point in one of the parcels of the applicant's choice. There must include at least one transit station stop, and STI may extend beyond the boundaries of the project area, but a pedestrian entrance must be located inside the project area. Next slide, please. For our program, the development type must be new construction or rehabilitation. This includes preservation of affordable housing that is at risk of conversion to market rate housing and conversion of non-residential structures to residential. Sponsors shall ensure not to commence construction, including demolition, at the time of application, except for emergency repairs. The location should meet the needs of tenants and be near key destinations. Projects proposed by tribal entity applicants must be located in Indian country or located on fee or trust land within the state of California. Next slide, please. The project must demonstrate it complies with fair housing requirements. The project site is free from severe adverse environmental conditions, ensure compliance with all applicable state and federal building codes and accessibility laws, and meet ADA compliance requirements. The project site must be physically capable of accommodating broadband service with at least a speed of 100 megabytes per second for uploading and 50 megabytes per second for rural locations. And for downloading, 20 megabytes per second and 10 megabytes for rural. Applicants are required to provide high-speed internet service to each restricted unit for a minimum of 3 years. Next slide, please. Affordability. Rental and home ownership projects must include at least 20% of the total residential units as affordable units. Rental projects must have an overall project average affordability of all restricted units no greater than 50% represented by AMI. For home ownership, there is no requirement regarding overall project average affordability of restricted units. There is an example calculation on the slide. Next slide, please. For net density, it is the total number of dwelling units per acre of land to be developed for residential or mixed use, excluding allowed deductible areas. Projects can now calculate net density using either a unit count or bedroom count. However, applicants must still use unit count for quantification of GHG. For more details on net density, it can be found in section 103D of the guidelines. Next slide, please. So for project types, there are 3 different project types, which are TOD, ICP, and RIPA. For these area types, the requirement for a transit station stop are as follows. It must include a high-quality transit for TOD and a quality transit for ICP. The transit station stop must be no farther than 1/2 mile from the AHD and in operation at time of application. For RIPA projects, it must commit to building a quality transit or high quality transit by certificate of occupancy. All project area types must include one of the following: AHD and or HRI, and at least one of the following: STI, TRA, or programs. Next slide, please. Threshold and scoring determinations and appeal process. In round 7, HCD, SGC, and CARB introduced a combined threshold and score letter. This was done in order to streamline the 2 separate letters into a 1-letter process, making the appeals process more efficient, saving us valuable time so we can maintain a 1-year award cycle, and ensuring applicants can receive their award letters prior to TCAC's application deadline. Next slide, please. The threshold and scoring outcomes of the project will determine which letter you'll receive. A, pass threshold, no change to scoring, is a pass letter with no appeal. B, pass threshold with a change to scoring is a scoring appeal only. Fail threshold with a change to scoring, threshold and scoring appeal. If a project fails threshold, it is important to note that a successful threshold appeal is required for staff to review appeals to the QPS scoring and GHG adjustments. Please note, any application submission missing required documentation to elevate applicant eligibility will receive a disqualification letter. There is no appeal process for disqualification. The example on the screen shows a sample final appeal determination letter. In the first column, the maximum points available for that category. The next column is the self-score from the application. And the last column is the final verified score post-appeal. And now I will hand it over to Christine to cover scoring requirements.
Thank you, Donna. Hello, my name is Christine Reese, and I will be going over scoring criteria for this round. AHSC scoring criteria incentivizes applicants to build projects that align with program goals and ensure that funds are allocated to projects that meet program's objectives. Our program has historically been oversubscribed. The NOFA for our last round was $750 million. We received more than $1.4 billion in funding requests. Next slide. For a project to be considered for scoring and potential funding, it must first satisfy the threshold requirements specified in Section 106 of the AHSC guidelines. And as Donna just reviewed, scoring criteria is divided into 3 main categories, further divided into subcategories for a total of 100 points. However, it's unlikely for any project to achieve the full 100 points. The categories are GHG reductions, quantitative policies, and narrative-based policies. For all scoring categories, it is the responsibility of the applicant to provide accurate, complete, and clear descriptions of their proposed projects. In the following slides, we will review each category. Next slide, please. GHG emissions reductions. The purpose of quantification methodology is to estimate and communicate the climate benefits and co-benefits of individual projects and estimate reductions in vehicle miles traveled, jobs generated, and to evaluate program performance to ensure policy goals are being met. It is advised to consult with the AHSC quantification methodology for a list of project components that can be quantified. 30 of the 100 points are dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as you can see here, with 5 points going to transit and shared mobility GHG reductions, 10 points to project area GHG reductions, and 15 points to GHG efficiency outcomes. Next slide, please. All of CARB's quantification guidance and tools are available online on the CARB CCI Quantification Benefits and Reporting Materials webpage. Here you will find the benefits calculator tool and all the materials for GHG quantification for the AHSC program. A recorded webinar of the GHG benefits calculator tool that was conducted by California Air Resources Board can be accessed in the Round 8 materials section at SGC's website. Live links can be accessed through the PowerPoint presentation posted on the AHSC webpage following the webinar. These links can also be located by visiting the CARB webpage. Next slide. The GHG emissions reductions of each application will be ranked from highest to lowest. Each application will be assigned to one of 5 bins in ranked order. Each bin will receive an assigned point score. The score of each GHG category will be combined to determine the project's total GHG score. Please note, projects that do not include a transit component, or if they do include transit components that result in a net increase in emissions, they will be placed in bin 5, but receive 0 points for the transit and shared mobility GHG category. Next slide, please. The GHG Affordable Housing Transit and Solar PV Inputs tab can be located at the HCD AHSC webpage in the Notice of Funding section just below the NOFA and application. Each of these documents will be used by CARB staff to confirm the user inputs for each of the respective tabs within the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool. Applicants, transit agencies, and mobility service providers should provide all information requested in the templates for each proposed project. Additional evidence where requested should be attached, and a signature is required to affirm inputs are correct and the proposed projects will be built as stated. If the inputs in the AHSC Benefits Calculator tool differ from the inputs in any of these documents, CARB staff will defer to these documents to verify and score GHG benefits. If the information in this document is not submitted, CARB staff will not score the GHG benefits of the proposed project. A few quantification tips. Have the QM and user guide handy. There is a section in the guide that lists out all the inputs that you are going to need to fill out the calculator. Or if you need to define something, you are going to find that in the user guide. Review inputs for all quantifiable components to determine which components you can quantify. And documentation is required for all user components. Next slide, please. Now on to quantitative policy scoring. The goal of the AHSC program is to incentivize those projects that are achieving the highest maximum efficiency within their proposed capital projects. For quantitative policy, the maximum score for the 10 categories is 52 points. Each scoring section is aligned with the goals of the AHSC program, such as improving transportation and encouraging housing and transportation collaboration. This includes context-sensitive bikeways, safe and accessible walkways, improved local bus routes, projects that achieve green building status, land use near transit stations, proximity to key destinations, committed funding for all permanent financing, local jurisdictions that increase their housing availability and promote equitable communities, anti-displacement measures, local workforce development, maintaining housing affordability, and providing programs and services for residents. Next slide, please. I will now go over key changes this round to quantitative policy scoring. For active transportation and transit improvements, new this round, an increase to the lane miles needed for context-sensitive bikeway points, and increase to the points for maximum lane miles. Up to 4 points for the total length and lane miles of AHSC-funded context-sensitive bikeways, 4 points for at least 2 lane miles, and 1 point is given for at least 1 lane mile. The AHSC program can fund new or improved bikeways regardless of whether they are context sensitive, but points will only be given to those that do qualify as context sensitive. Converting a temporary Class 4 bikeway to a permanent one using physical barriers qualifies as an eligible cost. However, it does not qualify for GHG quantification if it is not a new bikeway. Next slide, please. In previous rounds, applicants could receive 2 points for at least 1,000 continuous linear feet of new pedestrian facilities. New to round 8, a tiered structure has been created, and projects will be eligible for points based on the continuous linear feet of new pedestrian facilities. Also new this round, a clarified description of what is considered a continuous improvement. Continuous improvement means the distance of the new facility represented by one singular, unbroken, unduplicated line on the project area map. And the requirement that the improvements be along one bus route has been eliminated. Instead, the improvements must be in the project area and will be eligible for 2 points for each strategy implemented, up to 4 points. Based on stakeholder feedback, the scoring strategy for installation of a new off-board fare collection kiosk has been removed. A clarified strategy has been made to include installation of bus pull-outs or transit boarding islands. Next slide, please. Projects can receive points based on the amount or percentage of AHSC funds requested for STI. 5 points for at least $7,500,000 or 25% of total funding request, and 2 points for at least $4,500,000 or 15% of total funding requests. And for TRA, 2 points for at least $1,500,000 or 5% of total funding requests. Projects which provide documentation that their site is near an environmentally cleared high-speed rail station or funding the construction of community-identified components from other SGC programs, or an affordable housing development that is to be built on land designated as excess land or land designated as surplus land, will receive 3 points. Next slide, please. Now on to pro-housing designation. As Mark mentioned earlier in this presentation, 2 points will be awarded for projects located in jurisdictions that have applied for a pro-housing designation and is certified by the department within 45 days after the application due date. Anti-displacement. The requirements to develop an assessment of the housing needs for the communities overlapping the project area has been eliminated this round. New this round, projects in partnership with a nonprofit or locality must submit a commitment letter using the AHSC commitment letter template. Next slide, please. Narrative-based policy scoring. Here you will provide responses to the questions and prompts outlined in the narrative prompts document, which can be found at the SGC AHSC program webpage. Community benefit and engagement. This is based on residents, developers, stakeholders, government, and our community-based organizers that were engaged in helping shape the project. Climate adaptation and community resiliency. This asks the applicant to outline potential risks posed from climate change and other environmental exposures to the project and address how the risks will be reduced. Collaboration and planning. This outlines how the proposed project aligns with previous planning efforts of local government, housing, and transportation agencies, and addresses community needs related to climate, health, housing, mobility, access, and safety. Equity and transformation. This final scoring category asks the applicant how the project will advance equity or shape future projects in the nearby community. Next slide, please. Additional information regarding how the project supports the regional vision for planning and reduces barriers for people with disabilities will be requested in the narrative form. Thank you, and I will now hand it off to Flavio to go over feasibility.
Thank you, Christine. Man, that was a lot of good info, right? My name is Flavio Cordero, and I'll be guiding you through feasibility, the third and final phase of the application review process. Next slide, please. One moment. I guess it was in camera, so sorry, guys. Again, my name is Flavio Cordero, and I'll be guiding you through the feasibility, the third and final phase of the application process. Just a little intro about feasibility. It is part of our threshold requirements. Going to touch on briefly section 106B4. The application must be sufficiently complete to assess the feasibility of the proposed project and its compliance with AHSC and application requirements. Also, the department will be following underwriting guidelines, UMRs 8310, when analyzing project feasibility. Next slide, please. Total development costs. When determining the total development cost, please make sure that the amount of the budget and the total amount of the PERM funding are matching. The department will lower the loan amount of the request program funds if the funding sources exceed the development cost. Also, there is a high cost verification calculator as part of the application. If the high cost exceeds 160%, HCD will require an explanation and might result in disqualification. Next slide, please. When reviewing the development budget, please make sure to verify the following. Contractor overhead and profit cannot exceed 14% of the cost side work and structures, excluding builders' general liability insurance. Also, hard cost contingency should be a minimum of 5% for new construction projects and a minimum of 10% for acquisition rehab projects. If the amount provided is greater or less than the minimum requirements, a letter of explanation or comments must be provided. Next slide, please. There are costs that might be included in other line items or have multiple costs included in a single line items. We just ask for you to separate each cost. If for some reason the amount cannot be separated, it should be explained in the comment section. Here are some examples of those costs: prevalent wages, accounting, miscellaneous items. Please note prevalent wages are different than prevalent wage and monitoring. The department will verify that these items do not include any ineligible uses of funds. Next slide, please. Anytime other cost is added, please remove specify in parentheses and identify the cost. As you can see on the screen, we have an example in there. All you need to do is remove the word specify and just specify the cost that you're referring to. Additionally, if there are multiple costs included in a single line item, please separate the amounts in the comment section located at the bottom of the development budget and sources and uses. Next slide, please. The following slides are applicable for loans only. Next slide, please. An operating reserve is required to cover operating shortfalls resulting from department's approved operating expenses exceeding operating income beyond the rental period. Operating reserves are calculated from replacement reserves, non-contingency debt services, and project operating expenses, excluding the cost of on-site supported service coordinator. For tax projects, the department will require 3 months reserves, and for non-tax projects, the department will require 4 months reserves. Next slide, please. If the development budget includes a reserve that exceeds the amount required by the department, the reason for the excess amount must be explained in the comment section as shown here. Next slide, please. Any project proposing project-based rental assistance shall comply with HCD's pool transition reserve policy. For calculation, whether you are using the total or annual amount, a fee of 15% of the annual amount will be due at PERM closing. The application has an integrated transition reserve calculator, so applicants with project-based rental assistance will know what the fee is upfront. Next slide, please. Any project proposing, sorry, I said that. The department will review the operating budget for the following, but not limited to, and the employee information section, bookkeeping, accounting services, 0.42% monitoring debt service fee for each HCD loan, annual bond issuer fee, mandatory debt services. Please make sure this information is completed and accurate to avoid any further questions from the department. We use that information that is available to us in the application to complete the project report. We want to have the most detailed and accurate info as possible to determine if the project is feasible. If the information is not available, it will impact the cash flow analysis, including the debt service cover ratio, DSCR. Next slide, please. Before submitting your application, please make sure your debt service cover ratio, DSCR, is acceptable per underwriter guidelines. The first year of DSCR shall not be less than 1.10 or greater than 1.20 and must demonstrate a positive cash flow for 15 years. There are some exceptions per UMR's 8310 E2. As you can see in the example on your left, you have one one DSCR that is within guidelines, and on your right you'll have the DSCR that is over that is not within guidelines, and there are some exceptions for UMRs. Next slides, please. When completing the operating budget in the application, please make sure to always include the following. Here are some examples: number of employees, full-time equivalency, payroll taxes, workers' compensation, employee benefits. We wanted to point this out because these are the most common items missed in the application. It is important that payroll taxes, workers' compensation, and employee benefits are listed separately. For the employees unit section, please be sure to include the job title, unit type, and square footage. Next slide, please. Finance expenses should include mandatory debts. Mandatory debts includes amortized loans. As a reminder, balloon payments are not allowed on senior debts except where the department's regulatory agreement is recorded in a senior position to the debt with a balloon payment. Balloon payments are allowed on junior debts during the term of the program loan only where the department determines that the balloon payment will not jeopardize project feasibility. Mandatory debts also include the 0.42% annual debt service and the bond issuer fee. This amount must be included in the finance expenses section of the operating budget. Remember to include the annual debt service for any additional HCD loan separately. Asset management, partnership management, and any similar fees must not exceed the amount allowed per UMR's 8314B1. For year 2024, the amount allowed is $39,504 and will increase at the rate of 3.5% for each subsequent year. Now, this concludes the feasibility portion of the presentation. We're going to be taking a 10-minute break. It is 2:03. We'll be back at 2:13. Thank you, everyone.
All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Jeff Ford, and I will be covering the application highlights and some housekeeping items that will help you with application functionality. Next slide, please. To access the Round 8 application, you will navigate to Notice of Funding located on the AHSC website. Once you click Notice of Funding, the menu will expand, and you will see the Round 8 NOFA and Round 8 application. Next slide, please. The following steps are important for unblocking macros and will allow you to have full functionality of the application. So after clicking the Round 8 application, a new window will open. You will click Download File. The application will download to your computer. Once you open the application, you will enable editing. Next slide, please. Now, if after you have enabled editing and receive a message regarding security risk, it means that you will need to unblock your macros. To do so, please follow the next steps. You will have to save and close the application, reopen it, and enable editing. If you're no longer receiving the security risk, you can proceed to complete the application. Now, if you still receive the security risk banner at the top of your screen, you will need to close the application, right-click the file, and your pop-up window will appear. You will then select Properties. Select the Unblock box, then Apply and click OK. You will then reopen the application, and the security message should no longer appear. Following these steps will allow you to have full functionality of the application. Next slide, please. Now, just a brief recap of the housekeeping items before we discuss further application. So unblocking macros, which we reviewed on the prior slide, and the use of Office 2013 or newer versions. We highly recommend using Microsoft Computer instead of a Mac. This will allow you to have better application functionality. And if you could not write each of those housekeeping items down, we have included these instructions for your convenience in the application. Next slide, please. So to access all features of the application, we suggest completing the application from top to bottom and from left to right. Make sure you're answering all yellow cells and questions. If a question is not applicable to the scenario, please put in A. The application will highlight red any information that is incomplete, missing, or has failed to meet the program requirements. The box to the right of the screen provides the total development cost and a request for funding for each of the capital project components. This information is pulling from the unit mix, STI, TRA, and PGM tabs of the application. So please keep in mind at least 50% of AHC program funds for each project must be used for affordable housing. Next slide, please. The application contact list feature will require completing the entity name, eligible applicant type, and organization type under the project overview tab. When completing these fields, the application will automatically update cells on the contact list tab. Yellow highlighted fields are required fields that must be completed before moving on to the next step. Next slide, please. Now, I know that Flavio covered reserves information in a prior slide regarding the department's requirement on minimum reserves for tax and non-tax credit projects. The reserve calculator feature was introduced on the Round 7 application. The calculator will assist in providing HCD total required minimum reserves for replacement, operating, and transition reserves. Next slide, please. From the Project Overview tab, you must select Yes to AHD or HRI for the Max Funds and Unit Mix tabs to open. If you leave these two fields blank or select No for both, you will not have access to the Unit Mix tab. Next slide, please. Now, the Quantitative Policy Scoring tab. You will notice that this tab has a slightly different look from the prior rounds. So for example, the screenshot above, active transportation and transit improvements requires applicants to provide in detail lane miles, cross street, speed limit, and current and proposed bikeways, if applicable. For each section completed, the application will provide maximum scoring. After completion of each section, applicants will see their score based on the information they have entered. Next slide, please. Narrative-based policy scoring, or NBPS tab, will provide maximum points for each section and applicable to your project's narrative. It does have the same functionality regarding the upload to HCD question. By selecting yes, the upload checklist tab will update automatically from a red X to a green check mark. Next slide. Another feature for the application is the CARB info tab. This information is pre-filled as you complete your application, and you can use this information to complete the CARB calculator. You may find this tab helpful when accessing the links to CARB's website that Christine previously provided in the scoring criteria. Next section, please. The Upload Checklist tab is a comprehensive list of documents needed, but is not specific to project area when selecting from the Project Overview tab. The list will update automatically based on a yes or no answer to the question Upload to HCD. If you answered yes to the question, a green check mark will appear. If a red X mark appears, it could be that it's not applicable or that a document was not uploaded to our HCD portal. It is the applicant or sponsor's responsibility to double check that all documents are correctly labeled with the assigned file name and number and is uploaded to the portal. It's important during threshold that all required documentation is provided and includes the correct file name of the document uploaded to the application. Next slide, please. Now, if any errors occur during application, we have a dedicated team. Our application support unit will assist with any application errors or issues. So please make sure to describe the issue, error, or suggestions under the application support tab for clear understanding of the issue. After adding the comments, you will email the application to our application support unit at appsupport@hcd.ca.gov. And please also include the AHSC team as well at ahsc@hcd.ca.gov. So I want to thank you for your time, and I will pass it over to Jeffrey Fong, and he'll cover the application portal.
Thank you, Jeff. As stated by Jeff, I'll be covering the application portal. We have set up a portal to receive applications and support documents directly through our website. Next slide, please. Applicants can sign up by clicking on the Apply Now icon located on our department's AHSC webpage. Next slide, please. Use the register link in the upper right-hand corner. Here you will need to fill in all the required fields and agree to terms and conditions. Next slide, please. At the top of the first page, you will need to fill in the project area type, project name, and location. All fields that include a red asterisk are required fields. The user will be unable to proceed until all fields are complete. Next slide, please. After filling in general project information, all applicant information must be filled in as well. You have the option to select up to 3 co-applicants. Since these are required fields, only select co-applicant if you have their required contact information. Next slide, please. At the bottom of the page, before you can save and continue, you'll be asked to fill in the requested amount for each funding component. Chances are you won't have these figures at the time of registration. It's okay to allow the fields to remain at the default 0 amount. However, we do ask before final application submission that you return to this page and input the requested amounts from the application workbook. Next slide, please. Once you click Save and Continue, the next page is where you can begin uploading the application and all supporting documentation. Here you will see boxes or tiles that will identify the documents that should be loaded for each section. These documents can easily be dragged and dropped or upload for submission. Be sure to click Save before exiting. Next slide, please. If the Submit button is not present, this means all required documents have not been uploaded. Double check all the tiles with the red asterisk, and of course, your application checklist to make sure nothing has been missed. Next slide, please. Once documents are saved, an application number will be generated with project name, date of submission, and name of contact person submitting the application. At this time, An email will be generated and sent to you confirming your application number and identifying the documents that have been uploaded to the portal. Next slide, please. Prior to application deadline, you can return to the application portal at any time to continue uploading documents. Simply use your login ID and password, click on Requests, select HCD Request, and select your application number and project name. Next slide, please. Signatures are no longer required as part of the submittal process. The complete application with supporting documents must be uploaded and submitted by Tuesday, March 19, 2024 at 4 p.m. Prior to deadline, if you have yet to submit your application, a reminder email will be sent out. Next slide, please. Applying to AHSC funding is a competitive process that has been historically oversubscribed. Your application will be evaluated solely upon the materials contained within your submission. Applications must meet all eligible requirements, be organized properly, only submit one application, be complete in compliance with program regulations and guidelines. Application with substantial inconsistencies may result in disqualification. Applications must meet all eligible requirements upon submission, such as housing element, pro-housing, and RIPA transit stop in place. Remember, no late applications will be accepted under any circumstances. Next slide, please. And lastly, it is important to note that the information included in your application becomes a public record, which is available for review by the public. By submitting your application, you are waiving any claim of confidentiality. You're also consenting to the disclosure of all material upon request. Please only provide information specifically requested within the application. Now, Alicia will finish up with our last few slides and move into our Q&A session.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Now let's wrap up the presentation with department policies. Let's move over there, sorry. Department policies, updates to quantitative methodology reporting, and where to locate additional materials and resources. For projects that have or will have other HCD funding, the maximum cumulative per project amount for all department funding sources for housing development is $50 million. A single developer cannot receive more than $100 million in housing cost per an AHSC funding cycle. The base amount per restricted unit is $250,000. That includes all department loan and grant awards made to housing. A manager's unit will be considered a restricted unit for the purposes of allocating per unit housing cost and may qualify for a loan amount up to the applicable 60% AMI. Our department's disencumbrance policy requires all awarded projects to secure their funding sources within 24 months of an initial HCD award. Also, in an effort to address the ongoing affordability housing crisis and be responsible stewards of public funding, the department has established a comprehensive policy for determining negative points across our various departments' programs. We recommend doing a pre-check with HCD prior to submitting your application. You can email us at complianceverification@hcd.ca.gov. Also, please review the Administrative Memo 22-01 for more information. The department's stacking repeal makes it possible for a project to have more than one HCD funding source, with a limit of no more than 2 loans and 2 grants. This does not include the AHSC transit and program grant funding. And quantification methodology. Our partners at CARB periodically review each benefits calculator tool to evaluate their effectiveness and update methodologies to make them more robust and user-friendly. The draft QM for round 8 was made available to the public for comment from November 16th through the 30th. CARB has updated the round 8 AHSC quantification methodology from the previous version to enhance usability and clarity. However, no substantive changes were made for this round. In the Shared Mobility tab of the Benefits Calculator tool, applicants can use the Clean Mobility Calculator to estimate the benefits of a shared mobility project. For the AHSC Benefits Calculator, bike share was removed from the active transportation tab And bike share projects can also use the Clean Mobility Calculator tool to determine estimated outcomes. Changes for round 8 include updating default lookup table values, adding a list of key terms and definitions to the calculator tool, updated QM references to ITE trip manual, clarified language in the QM and user guide, and updates to all on-road transportation-related tabs. These updates are also listed in the AHSC quantification methodology documentation, which can be found through CARB's CCI quantification benefits and reporting material link that Christine had mentioned previously in our scoring section. So here are some additional resources to assist you further. By clicking on Guidelines and Regulations at the HCD AHSC website, you will find a link to the guidelines and supplemental materials, which will direct you to the resources page at SGC's website. Here you will find additional reporting materials, including, as previously stated in the scoring section, the GHG benefits calculator tool, as well as the project area mapping video tutorial. We encourage you to sign up for email updates on our HCD website. By clicking on Contact at the top bar, you will open an email sign-up. Here you can enter your contact information to receive all program updates and alerts. You can also follow us on social media. Here are the handles for our social media pages for Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and LinkedIn. And here are links to TCAC's regulations. The most current changes were posted in January of 2023. A methodology for determining rule status, TCAC and HCD opportunity area maps, and a link to the California legislature where you can research proposed and passed Senate and Assembly state bills. And here are the HCD and SGC email inbox addresses. But as Mark had mentioned earlier, we encourage you applicants to submit questions for this round using the Q&A form at AHSC's website. Here your questions will be answered, and the questions and answers will then be saved to a spreadsheet form that can be viewed by the public. So prior to submitting a question, you may want to view the Q&A form to see if your question has already been addressed. And with that, we would like to say thank you for attending our AHSC NOFA presentation this afternoon. And we will open it up for any questions at this time. Thank you. Sure, how we want about doing that.
Thank you, everybody. We have concluded our presentation for today, but we definitely wanted to leave some time to go over any questions you all may have. So feel free to raise your hand in the chat. Otherwise, if you can put in your question in the question and answers feature in Zoom, we can get you a prompt response. Thank you. All right, well, I'm hoping that we just did such a tremendous job that we don't have any questions at this point, but I have to believe there's something out there. So we'll wait a couple of minutes and see if there are any questions that come in, but we also see people dropping off. So I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for participating in our workshop presentation. Also, please keep in mind if you do have any questions that come up as you continue your application process, as well as reviewing the NOFA and the guidelines that are currently available in preparation to submit your AHSC application, please reach out to the SGC webpage where you can find the question and answers form, and you can detail out your questions there and expect a response from SGC and also HCD, because we work in partnership to answer those questions. And we will get that back out to you within 4 business days of receipt. So again, thank you so much, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll hang out for another 3 minutes and see if anything comes in. Otherwise, we'll shut down the webinar at that point. Hi, Alec. We see your hand up. Are you able to speak? Do you have the capability to open up your mic? I see you've muted. Oh, sorry. Can you try again and unmute, and then let's see if we can hear you?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I had to change my headset around. I guess the one that I was
No
using wasn't
worries.
working. So I had a quick question on thank you guys so much to SGC and HCD staff for that wonderful presentation. I just had a quick question in regards to the urban greening portion. I see on the guidelines on page 23 that there's a portion that reads that there's a need for at least one urban greening feature within the project area, and in that regards to $200,000 in reasonable direct urban greening costs. And then I also saw that there was a slide that talked about TRA and urban greening, and just wanted to see if I can get some clarification. I know that there is that 5% and $1.5 million for, I think in round 7 it was referred to as the block face, where the transit stop is. Is that related, or can you guys expand on that? Let me know if I'm being clear. Thanks.
You're on mute, Lynn.
Sorry, Mark. Oh, I see your cat. Is that something that you want to take? I was asking whether or not that was a scoring question or an eligibility question for Alec. Okay, Mark, if you have a response, go ahead and go. I don't hear Alec responding.
Yeah, so it was regarding the TRA and block face.
Yeah, just yeah, a little bit about you know, that the urban greening, is that the same thing that you guys are referring to, or is it separate for that $200,000 in urban greening? Would that be considered
urban greening would be publicly accessible trees or bushes native planting, and other opportunities. That could be along the exterior of the property. That could be trees that are directly outside, along the sidewalk, either right along the property area or anywhere within the actual project area. So urban greening means trees, bioswales, water infiltration, and things such as that. And that fund could be considered part of the TRA fund, and could be part of the TRA along a block face of a transit stop if you are doing trees or plantings along that block that has a bus stop.
Okay, very good. Very good. I think that addresses question that I had. So again, thank you guys so much for your time, and that was very helpful.
Thank you. And then I just responded in writing that there were someone asking the question around points for projects that are implementing community identified priorities through other Strategic Growth Council funded projects. And so what I mentioned there are that some of those projects include the Transformative Communities Collaborative, Climate Resilience Centers, Regional Climate Collaboratives, PACE, Boost. There's a lot of different programs that are run by the Strategic Growth Council that involve community engagement and community identified priorities. And so if there's a project that has been funded by SGC in the community area, and there's they've said, I would like a bike lane on that street, there's not a crosswalk here, or as vague as, I would like affordable housing in this neighborhood, we will take whatever example it is that folks may be able to point to. So it'd be about kind of the overlapping connections of the work there to make sure that we're building upon all of our previous work.
Thanks so much, Mark, for taking those questions. Appreciate you and your expertise there. Are there any other questions? We are monitoring the question and answers and also our participants list. I don't see any hands up. So thank you all for attending. I see some names that I am familiar with, so good to connect with you all again. And I guess we'll go ahead and close this out. Please keep in mind, we do have another webinar presentation. It will be the same information that we've covered today that we will be covering on Thursday the 6th at the same time, or I'm sorry, Thursday the 8th, February 8th at the same time. So if you have any questions or comments and you want to join that one, then go ahead and register. Otherwise, we look forward to reviewing your applications when they come in. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.